everybody to the May 19th Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting, and happy Election Day. We have one time certain today at 1:30 p.m. and I need to read a little bit of information for those people who are joining us online. So to the public watching the meeting, when you're registered to watch this meeting, you're registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting, an audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted for the meeting. However, there will be a time in the meeting for public comment, and when that time comes, if you wish to participate in public comment, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized. And you should see a hand icon on your device, and you just simply press it once. When public comment begins, our meeting organizer will call the names. When your name is called, you will be unmuted and given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you'll go back to a muted status and the next name will be called. You can continue watching the webinar for as long as you like. We'll try to give everyone who wishes to participate in public comment an opportunity to speak, but please note if there is an event of more people than we have time allotted, we may need to reduce the time per speaker, or we will choose different speakers for as much time as we have. We haven't really had that problem since we started, so I don't foresee that happening. That just depends on how many speakers we have in a particular day. So with that, we'll start with the agenda. And item number 1 is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments from anybody? I don't see any, so we'll move to item 2, emergency business. Any emergency business? Okay, I don't see any, and so it is now time for public comment. And I'll turn it over to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, I only show one person is online for public comment, Mr. Caraco, Joshua Caraco. I will unmute you and I will start the timer and you can begin speaking when the timer starts. I'm unmuting you now and I will switch to the timer.
Councilors, commissioners, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Wow, I did not know this was going to be so early. In the agenda, I manage the hotline at the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. You've heard me speak before, but you've heard me give you data about our community. A lot of that data was repeated to you by our own very competent public health team last week, so I don't need to continue to give you that data. What I haven't told you about is why we care so much here at the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. I haven't told you about what I do, about our hotline, about the calls we're getting, about the very real need to legislate to solve some of these issues. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders, but 30% of our calls have been people worried about evictions. Most of those are threats or fear. They're not always notices. Many of them are, but there is currently, some of them are actual notices, but there's currently a moratorium on notices for non-payment of rent. So right now that's not an issue, but if that moratorium is lifted and people call me because they're getting evicted for non-payment of rent, there's very little I can actually do for them, even if the county has so nicely put our website as a resource for renters on the website. About 1 in 10 of our calls is about someone asking for rent assistance. That may not seem like a lot, but it was not something that was happening before the lockdown. I used to get calls every couple months about this. I now get 1, 2, or more every week. There's not anything I can really do about that. That's not what our hotline does. We don't have that resource available. About people trying to get out of their leases. We have gotten a lot of calls about that. It is not something there is a legal fix for right now. Rent increases. Some people, about 1 in 10 of my callers has gotten a rent increase. My own landlord did not raise my rent. Many landlords out there believe it is inappropriate to raise people's rent right now. But there are large companies who raise rent right now. Several of my calls have come from large companies. And if I get one, that may represent many thousands more. I cannot help sometimes that is above the maximum amount. Sometimes it is an improper notice time. I can help someone understand that. But many of these are properly served notices at the maximum allowable under state law. So there's very little I can do to help those people. These require legislative solutions. This is why we ask our legislators to do what they can, because putting my website as a resource can't help these people. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Chair Buck, that concludes our people signed up for public comment today.
Okay, thank you for speaking. We'll go to Commissioner's response and remonstrance. Any responses? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank our public commenter. We're going to be looking at our work session later today, and some material went up on the website yesterday in conjunction with that upcoming discussion. So I'm looking forward to that. What I wanted to address today was the important issue of campaign finance reform. You know, America is drowning in a sea of campaign contributions to people seeking elective office from every office in the land, from president and vice president all the way to the State House and City Hall and the courthouse. And we're no different, except that in Oregon we have some of the most lax campaign finance reform laws in the United States. And part of that has been rulings of our Oregon Supreme Court that have, until quite recently, upheld the view that money and speech are the same thing. Well, that changed in April, about a month ago, when the Oregon Supreme Court approved limits on campaign contributions. Now, the statutes involved a city and a county in Oregon that had enacted $500 limits on individuals and groups giving money, and they covered things like individual limits, limits on campaign expenditures, and independent committees that help candidates win elections, and also that include the requirement to disclose the funding sources that people get. So we've long had in Oregon campaign disclosure law where candidates must disclose their contributions on a statewide website, but now the requirement upheld by the Supreme Court is to require that these contribution amounts be disclosed on campaign materials itself. So I think that, you know, we have on election day, you know, an opportunity to encourage people to vote and vote by mail or bring it into the election drop-off locations. In fact, it's too late to vote by mail. If you're out there today and you haven't voted, the only way you can vote is to go physically to the elections office or to drop it off prior to 8 p.m. tonight. So, you know, we have a good system, I think, to encourage people to vote, but we have a very bad system. And I hope the board will join me in requesting an update from the people that sponsored these campaign finance reform measures, as well as Multnomah County and our own Lane County Legal Counsel, to have a work session on moving forward with a code amendment to make it clear that this is something Lane County needs. We want to take advantage of the path-breaking work that's been done, particularly in Multnomah County, and have a fairer system of elections so that it isn't money that decides what kind of democracy we live under. It's the vote of the people and a fair election process that involves limiting the amount of money that an individual can give to the campaign of a particular commissioner. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. But do we have an unlimited amount of time to speak during this particular agenda item?
Well, right now our agenda is moving pretty quick, but you know, we have run late in prior meetings, so keep that in mind.
Okay, I see the agenda item says limit 2 minutes, so I'll stay within that. I just wanted to congratulate you, Chair Buck, on what happened last Friday. We were together at the turning over the keys ceremony, I guess is what it was more than anything, for the COVID-19 Emergency Response Center on River Avenue. We had a wonderful turnout with the limits that we had as far as maximum gathering size, including a general, a colonel, and a major from the Corps of Engineers. But Chair Buck, you did a superb job of facilitating the meeting. You were the MC, so to speak, and the comments that were made were wonderful. The only thing that I'd like to say is that after the ceremony, or after it became public, a number of people were asking me, well, how many people are staying there right now? And the answer, of course, is 0. And at the time, it hadn't been opened yet. And my answer beyond that was that I would hope that it would never go beyond 0, that we would never have to have anybody stay there. But it is there should we need it for a second wave or whatever may happen down the road for COVID. But more significantly, is future use. We are anticipating that it's going to in the future be used as a navigation and shelter center for unhoused people. In navigation, it's not just giving people a place to spend tonight. It's a way to get people out of homelessness by accessing behavioral health services, by accessing other funds that they may not know they have available to them. It's going to be a wonderful addition to our presentation regarding getting people, delivering people from homelessness. And Chair Buck, you were there. You saw how well it went, and you saw how beautiful that facility is in terms of its capacity and in terms of its ability to serve people who will ultimately be staying there. So, Mr. Mokrahayski, thank you for the work that the entire staff did toward this. And I'm looking forward not to its current use, but to its future use. Thank you.
Well, the Friday event was really wonderful, but it wasn't me. We are at the policy level, so I really thank the Corps of Engineers and our staff, and they did a fantastic job for that facility. Any other comments or remonstrance? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I just want to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light several flaws in past policy, one of which was predicted, which was establishing statewide rent control would basically establish a baseline of what rent increases will be annually by setting a maximum allowable, because many landlords are going to go the maximum allowable for fear that next year's expenses might jump beyond that. So we are seeing that, and Joshua provided evidence of that in some of his testimony. We're also seeing the failure of our land use system in driving up those rents and not providing enough front doors, as well as going towards a land use pattern that will actually exacerbate future pandemics. As we're seeing, the worst places for death rates in this country are the highest densities. So folks are now getting used to working from home and remote working, and we're starting to see a lot of interest in real estate in places like Boise and Bozeman, and not in New York City or Los Angeles. So we need to seriously think about what land use looks like post-COVID-19, and also thinking about how we can make more front doors happen in our community. And I'll just also note that the pandemic's kind of given us a preview of what it's going to be like to live under what some people want to do under the cap and tax system for carbon, in that it's going to cause unemployment, cause these issues for renters making their rent, and ultimately have the economic impacts that the shutdown has caused. So I would just caution people to look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and think about what some of our past government policies are and put that lens on them and think about, is that what we want to continue to do in the future? Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Hey, Joshua, thank you very much for your input. I don't know if you've noticed, but some elected officials will use what you say to make points they want to make that really didn't directly respond. Maybe it indirectly responded. I'd like to directly respond. I think what you're speaking about is an underlying anxiousness and anxiety and fear of the unknown. And I think we all are feeling that. I think in my business life, I always wanted certainty, and it's the uncertainty that now businesses, much less all of us, are feeling. I'm pleased to say that yesterday at the Human Services Commission, we learned about almost $2 million, much of which can be used for rent relief. And we're going to be discussing that this afternoon. And that is so breaking that this Board of Commissioners did not even have that background as information when the agenda item of discussion of rent relief was placed on our agenda as a result of some of the CETA's testimony heretofore. So we will be discussing specific resources. We will be looking at your recommendations, and we'll be doing what we can, which will never be enough, but it'll always be something. So thank you for your input.
Commissioner Farr.
Chair Buck, and my apology, I did forget to respond to Joshua. I've been online looking at the website for the Springfield Eugene Renters Association. I looked up Eugene Springfield, but it's Springfield Eugene, if anybody's looking for that. And in fact, you are a resource. You say that you can't be a resource for some of the things that people are asking you to do. Nobody can be. You are a resource for many other things. And one thing that you do, Joshua, is you are an amalgamated voice. That is to say, you are a louder voice for the many members of your association to get your point across the legislative changes that need to happen. Any association does that. Any association is a loud voice that can be heard more clearly at a legislative level, and you are doing that. So keep up the good work on that. Associations do that, and that's what membership in your association will do for your members, is you will be a voice. You'll be a voice that is heard at legislative meetings such as this one. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll just add for myself, in response to Mr. Caraco's public input here today, is that I know what he's saying is absolutely 100% right. There are people calling in that are having these problems, and we need to find solutions. Some of them are going to be city, some county maybe, and some state, and trying to decipher which one is the most appropriate in response to all of these issues is the hard part. And then advocacy, as he is doing today, is the part that reminds us that these things are going on and tenants need help. CETA does a wonderful job with trying to help them with the tools that they have, and I appreciate their work very much. And it's up to us to find the other ways in which to help all those folks that are having such a hard time right now paying rent or mortgages at that. There are both. So with that, if there aren't any other comments, I just want to thank those that came today to do public comment, and hopefully we'll hear more from you all in the future at public comment sessions. And one of these days we'll get back to having our evening public comment session as we had started. So we will move on now to item number 5, the consent calendar. There's not too much on there today. I would entertain a motion for approval. Commissioner Sorensen.
So moved.
I second Commissioner Burney's motion.
Good. Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. It is passed unanimously. We'll move on now to item 6A, our COVID-19 update. with Mr. Mokrahysky and Karen Gaffney, our EOC Incident Commander.
Karen, you can go ahead and I can add any comments if need be.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. I have a number of things I am eager to share with you this morning, so I'm just going to launch through my report and hope to cover those as quickly as possible so we can maximize our time for conversation and questions. In terms of the cases currently in Lane County, as of this morning, we have 66 people who have tested positive for COVID-19. 59 of those people have recovered, 5 are resting at home, and we have had 2 people who passed away. We currently, and that 66 does include 1 presumptive and 65 confirmed cases. We still have no one who's hospitalized for COVID, and I feel very blessed about that situation in our community. Our testing numbers continue to increase, and again, I would remind both the board and the public that all of that information is available on our website. If you want to track that progress, you can go to our COVID website, and we daily show the chart of how many test results are specimens are collected each day and test results move forward. One day last week, we had an excess of 350. We had 363 tests that day. And I'll remind you, our goal is to get to at least 500 a day. And several days last week, we were in excess of 300, and we anticipate that will continue to climb. And part of our testing program the last couple weeks has grown to include surveillance testing. So testing where we go into vulnerable populations and test everyone in that group. So it's not based on symptoms at all, but really just to go looking for cases, quite frankly, and to get a sense of the prevalence of the disease in the community. So we're continuing to do that work with populations in congregate settings, people in our homeless community, long-term care facilities, and based on our data, a particular focus on the Latinx community as well. So we will continue to do that work. Each time we report, we give you a financial update, and I know I did send that in advance, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that this morning, but I will say that our actual costs are at about 1.1 million with an additional 1.3 encumbered, so a total of a little more than $2.4 million to date, up against that $5 million authorization cap that was approved by the board. And I know we've talked about this in past meetings, but I'll remind the public again that some of these numbers are moving targets, and as grants become available and other resources to be able to cover some of these expenses, some of those numbers change, and then in particular, the amount encumbered is an estimate, and so as it moves over to actual, it may change there as well. I think I'm at this particular part of the report, I want to make sure the board knows that in terms of those reimbursements, we've talked from the beginning about FEMA as a potential resource, and that absolutely is true. As the federal government has passed different versions of CARES Act and federal resources are becoming available, the Emergency Operations Center is working with other county staff to make sure we're poised to capture as many of those dollars as possible. And we do, I know the board has talked in our updates about CARES Act money that came to the state, and the governor had not determined yet how that would be allocated, and that process is now moving forward, and the county expects to submit an application on Friday to cover some of the costs that have been incurred in the first few months of our emergency response. And so as that process is reviewed, we'll certainly report back to you on exactly the dollars that are able to be brought in for that. It's a nice piece because it's not only the pure public health costs, which are important, but it also is our other emergency response costs that are eligible. So thank you very much to Alex Kyler and our staff in Central Finance who are supporting the EOC and making sure that process moves forward. The board already mentioned our opening or our getting of the keys at River Avenue. It was an exciting milestone for us on Friday. And we still have no one who needs to be in that service. I agree with Commissioner Farr. Our hope is that we continue to contain the spread of disease in the community, and we're able to manage through this without that resource. However, we know it's likely that there will be a second wave, and it will be important to us to have that extra capacity in the community. Couple other categories I want to make sure I mention before I open it up for questions and comments. In our emergency response structure, we have focused on businesses from the beginning, and that piece becomes even more critical as we start to shift to a more structured emergency recovery support function. So beginning this week in our Emergency Operations Center, we have started to officially stand up recovery support functions, which are part of FEMA's plan for as communities move from that emergency response to recovery, how to help rebuild. And the recovery phase we would anticipate will be not a short-term endeavor, but probably 12, 18 months at least, as we help the community truly recover. What we know is we simultaneously need to support recovery while we still also respond to the public health emergency. So within our Emergency Operations Center, we're continuing a focus on public health emergency response, while we also have stood up recovery support functions focused on social services, on economic recovery, on housing, and then included a financial task force, which is organizing a lot of these things like the CARES grant money, that financial task force, and then a reentry task force, which is that link to the work of actually bringing all of the county services fully back online. So that recovery support effort is being led by Patience as our emergency manager, and is contained within our Emergency Operations Center. And then eventually we would anticipate that that group will spin off, continue to focus long-term on that recovery piece, while Health and Human Services focuses on the specific COVID public health response. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that. But as you see those efforts growing, I want you to know they are linked tightly in the EOC right now. As part of that recovery support work, I know you're going to talk this afternoon about rental assistance, and so I won't take a lot of time here to talk about that, other than to mention, in case there are community members who are watching this morning and won't be with us in this afternoon, that Lane County has received over $900,000 in state rent relief, and we expect additional federal dollars that will also be able to support that. And those dollars will begin to hit the street. The state dollars can move into the community more quickly than the federal dollars, but that is part of our recovery support work in the community, is to really make sure that people are able to maintain their housing, and will continue to be a piece moving forward. So again, I know you're going to have a work session on that this afternoon, so I won't take a lot of time there. Another example coming from our recovery support functions is the work around economic and business recovery. Austin Ramirez has been leading this work throughout our emergency response, and has transitioned to that economic recovery support function. And I'm pleased to say the county on Monday submitted an application in partnership with Dev Northwest and Community Lending Works on behalf of all of the communities across Lane County for emergency business assistance matching funds, and those will come through the Business Oregon. Collectively, our region has come together to request a match of up to $675,000. So that builds on the earlier $400,000 proposal and loans that we've already pushed out into the community. Obviously, we don't know if we'll be awarded that entire amount, but if awarded, that funding will be provided as grants and focused on eligible applicants in Lane County who are rural businesses, sole proprietors, or businesses owned by historically disadvantaged individuals. So for us, we're just very proud to submit an equity-centric proposal that really ensures rural businesses and others have access to those funds, ensures that funds are supporting small businesses who are unable to access or apply for federal funds, ensures that the funds are reaching every corner of Lane County, and that we're really helping keep businesses operational. So that's an exciting piece coming out of our EOC this week. And I think maybe I will stop there and see which particular topics you might be most interested in talking more about.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. Well, I'll tell you what, watching from a distance and even watching up close, it's amazing to see the teamwork that is occurring, orchestrated by you and your staff and key individuals. I want to first do a quick call out for two individuals that don't don't always get mentioned at board meetings. Jason Davis has really stepped up to the plate in my estimation. His commentary, his press conferences have become a kind of a local Walter Cronkite. People trust what he has to say. People listen to what he has to say, and he seems to report the news very, very accurately, succinctly, and in ways that people understand what he's saying. Good job, Jason. And Mr. Mokrahajski, Patience Willingham, I had a chance to talk to her at length on Friday, and it's amazing that she's only been with us for a little over a year, because it seems as though she's been with us forever. And the work she's doing is groundbreaking. A year ago, she had the opportunity, of course, to work on what we call Snowmageddon. And today she's working on a much broader, deeper crisis than Snowmageddon was. And the way she is, in her turn, orchestrating things is amazing. So, Ms. Gaffney, my question, other commissioners will probably ask questions that I would have asked, so I'm not going to ask them unless they don't. But the one that I have to ask is regarding the June 5th date. I've heard that June 5th is a date that we plan, or the target date for shutting down our shelters, our congregate shelters at the fairgrounds, and whatever other shelters, the one in Springfield perhaps. June 5th is the target date. My question is, and you may not have a full answer right now because it's a work in progress, what are we going to do on June 6th? Because currently, as you know, our regular providers, such as St. Vincent de Paul at Dusk to Dawn, has reduced their beds by as much as 50% in order to provide the spacing that's necessary. So we have far less of our regular beds in the community than we had prior to COVID-19. Many of those folks who have been staying at Dusk to Dawn are now staying at the Expo Center, or in the animal barns of the Expo Center. And the question, once again, Ms. Gaffney, I don't expect a full answer on this because it is a work in progress, but what are we going to do June 6th once people no longer have a site on county property? I've heard, now I'm not going to tell you what I've heard until I hear your question. Your answer, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioner Farr. I very much appreciate that question. I realize I didn't take the opportunity in my brief update to talk about our work around vulnerable populations. So I am going to answer your question, but I want to provide just a little bit of information before I do that. And we have done, I think, a tremendous job of being able to serve some of our most vulnerable in the community during this time of the governor's executive order to really have vulnerable people stay home. And we've been committed to not only providing respite centers for people at the Expo Center here in Eugene and over at the Memorial Center in Springfield, but also working with the cities of Eugene and Springfield in their efforts to help support people to be able to either manage in small tent camps or to be able to stay where they are in other, for lack of a better word, unsanctioned camping areas and be able to maintain there. We all know going into this time, there was a significant homeless crisis in our community. So that was not caused by COVID. And we've learned some things during our opportunity of responding to COVID, but we're not going to be able to solve all of that in this particular moment either. But I do want to tell you some of the things we're doing and what we've learned. We have started to not allow new people to register as guests at either of those respite centers. So there'll be a process between now and June 5th where they slowly get smaller in both of those sites, because people who choose to leave, we aren't opening up those beds to new people in those sites. And that's actually a similar process that we used other times in the community to help manage those sites and what the demobilization will actually look like. The other piece I would say, and June 5th isn't a magical date. We selected that date because we anticipate that's when we will be eligible to move to phase 2 of the reopening process. And that's the phase where more of the community will be opened up and people will have better access to their usual routes for resources and supports. So in that way, more closely return to what the state was prior to COVID. So that's why that date was selected. We've learned a lot about how to better do mobile outreach to people who are currently homeless and provide education, support, and distribute resources. We've closely connected with Whitebird and Carry It Forward and the work they're doing to support people. And we're also doing, I think, some exciting work in the rural areas, particularly South Lane County comes to mind. We've been doing neighborhood COVID-19 educational outreach among individuals who don't speak English in that community and have a challenging time accessing information. And we've trained so far 5 individuals to really help share COVID information and other resource information in that community. So that outreach has begun, and 82 individuals representing 15 different neighborhoods have been contacted with masks, hand sanitizer, educational material, and we're continuing to build those connections in community to really support our rural areas and our Latinx community. So that's a piece that will continue, is to really, during this next time, while we continue to grow all of our strategies and priorities as part of the TAC work, that we help people to be able to maintain in the community. As you know, Commissioner Farr, you've been a champion for this for a very long time. We do have a roadmap of how to really move the community to address the issue of homelessness. We know what we need to do, and we've actually made some significant progress during this pandemic response in that way. And I'm excited and looking forward to really picking back up that TAC work and moving forward with our permanent supportive housing. We'll talk about that later today, and our shelter and navigation center work.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. You went into great detail as to what we're doing across the board to help vulnerable communities. And Chair Buck, for the board itself, the June 5th isn't a magical date, but we have to be prepared for the fact that there will be people potentially who are currently enjoying, I'm not going to say enjoying, that's not the right word, but they're experiencing a safe place to sleep at night who may not once we close down those facilities, unless we pay attention to it ahead of time. Ms. Gaffney and staff are absolutely paying attention at this point in time. And as you pointed out, Ms. Gaffney, we've been able to do some things during the COVID-19 pandemic that we may not have been able to do before if it had not happened. I would not wish that it would happen again, but we were able to, for instance, purchase and remodel the River Avenue facility. That's not the only thing. So I'm confident, Ms. Gaffney, as we move forward, that you, Mr. Manella, and the other people whose brilliant minds are on this will find ways to make certain that people don't experience a gap in places to sleep between June 5th and June 6th. Once again, those aren't the magical dates, but whatever the date is, that we no longer have a place open at the fairgrounds. So thanks for that response, Ms. Gaffney, and we'll all keep an eye on the moving target that has been established. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gaffney, thank you for all of your good leadership and all the great work of people in your department during this crisis. I'm hoping that you can give us some good news regarding some of the concerns that people in the community have raised since our last meeting. One of those is, it sounds like you're not planning on a second wave, that you're planning on basically shutting down a lot of the assistance that we've been giving, particularly to the homeless, increasing the amount of testing, which drives up the number of cases, but not necessarily driving up. In fact, today we're still at a total of 2 deaths and a total of 0 current hospitalizations and 0 ICU. So am I correct? Is that correct that basically by the end of June or July that we'll see a continued ramp down in the governor's executive orders, and there's really no planning? Maybe that's unfair, but as I understand it, you're basically getting, quote, back to normal by the end of the summer, and you're not really anticipating any flare-ups or any changes in the overall direction of public policy. Is that a fair statement?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, I would actually say no. That doesn't accurately describe how we're thinking about this next 6 to 12 months. I would say, so there's a couple pieces to that. The first is we absolutely are planning and think it's likely that there will be a second wave. We don't know exactly when it will hit, but we know that in order to be prepared for that, we need to have maximum testing resources in the community and strong contact tracing and good supplies of PPE so that our hospitals and healthcare workers are able and ready to respond. So we are absolutely planning for all of those pieces. We're working with significant community stakeholders. Top of mind right now, for instance, is the University of Oregon. So making sure as they're working on their plans for the fall that we're closely synchronized with them and ready to not only respond, but understand for each entity, whether it's the hospital or the university, how we will activate our plans when the situation changes. I think when Dr. Ludke was with us a couple weeks ago, he talked about triggers in his roadmap or his blueprint that we'll be watching, that will be indicators for us of when that wave is coming. Jocelyn Warren, our public health manager, is fond of saying, in an epidemic, it's all fine until it's not. It can very quickly turn. So we absolutely are preparing for a second wave and need to be ready for that. And in the meantime, as good stewards of public resources, we know that while we are able to contain the spread of disease in the community, it's important for businesses to be able to reopen and for commerce to be able to flow. So we are committed to doing both of those things together in a way that protects the health of the community in the very best way possible. So I would not want the community to think that we think it's all over by any means. And I guess I would just say for those who are listening, it's particularly important right now, while some of the restrictions are being relaxed, that everyone remembers our efforts to flatten the curve were not at all about eliminating the virus from the community. It is absolutely still circulating in the community. Those efforts were in order to give us time to get testing up, PPE supplies in place, and our hospital systems ready. So it's critically important that people still do everything they can in terms of hygiene and distancing to protect themselves, protect each other, and our community in order for us to move forward.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you laid that out so clearly, and I think that one of the things I might recommend is, I have not seen any public statements from Lane County Public Health regarding the planning for the second wave. I think that there's been some discussion here at the Board of Commissioners about a second wave, but I don't think that we've ever had such a strong statement that we're planning for a second wave, that we can't relax the social distancing. And I just think that's a part of the messaging that I'm not seeing. I'm seeing reports where every day you put out an email, or the department does, it says, well, you know, 2 people died and that was a long time ago, and there's nobody in the hospital. There's 50, 60 cases. Those people are all recovering at home. And you're basically giving out a message that, you know, it's over with. And I just think that if you're trying to get people to take this more seriously and avoid some of the anecdotal reporting that we're getting, that people are wandering around in big groups without any masks and no social distancing, no 6 to 18 feet apart, nothing like that. It seems to me that we're just going to hit a rebound on the first wave. It won't even be the second wave. It'll be the first wave. So I just think that I would just encourage you to be a little more forthright and a little more direct about how the disease is most definitely in the community. It's not subsiding. It's perhaps not as deadly as we had feared, but it's certainly out there. And I just want to make that encouragement. Thank you.
Mr. Mokrowski, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think, and Karen, you certainly can jump in here too. I mean, I appreciate the sentiment that Commissioner Sorensen is expressing about, you know, making sure that we're informing the public about the facts. I think what's a delicate balance here is we have to tell the public the truth. And so we're reporting every single day the facts as we know them. We know that as of yesterday, and I didn't see the numbers from today, and I'm sorry, Karen, if I missed these this morning, we had 65 cases yesterday. We provide the data on the 5 new cases that we had, that 4 of those were either household transmission or connected to someone who is known. Another was through proactive contact tracing and testing that we did. We know how many people are sick at home. We know how many hospitalizations. We know where the real concerns are around our ability to continue to move through the phases around, you know, monitoring hospitalizations and monitoring the extent to which the virus is being transmitted between known cases or community spread, which is really a problem. So I guess, you know, my perspective certainly is that I think our team is doing an incredible job of sharing the facts of the information. It's really important that we not overly alarm the public and we not downplay, right? So it's a balance of, I don't think that we should be inflaming the situation and telling people that they should be concerned about things that they shouldn't be concerned about. And so we want to make sure that the public has that information. We're consistently messaging the need for people to wear masks, wear a face covering when you're not in your house, when you're out in the public. We continue to talk about the need for good public health practices like washing your hands and keeping 6 feet of physical distance, not touching your face, and again, wearing a face covering when you're out. So all of those things remain. I will say that we are, as has been reported in the public around the state prison system, we're having a conversation today, and we continue to monitor the impacts of inmates coming out of the state prison system and the role that the State Department of Corrections needs to play in testing individuals that are coming out of the prison system, and then allowing us at the local level to have plans in place for quarantine and those types of things. So we've been very open and explicit about those challenges and those local planning efforts. But I guess I just want to call for us to make sure that we're not overplaying the facts and we're not underplaying the facts. We're providing the facts as we know them, and we're pointing people to understand, analyze, understand, and react to the information that we think is most important, that Karen has talked about and that I mentioned, related to hospitalizations and where the virus is being spread, and continuing those good public health practices as we move through the phases. So Karen, what I would say is, I'm not sure what more we could do. I suppose there's always more we could do, but in terms of the public information and the education that's happening out there, following the governor's guidance and continuing to inform people about what has happened, what is happening, and what we expect could happen in the future is really what our focus has been.
Commissioner Burney, did I see your hand up before? Yes, and then Commissioner Bozovich after that.
Unless Commissioner Bozovich would rather speak first, I'm fine either way. Okay. First, I'd like to speak to Karen's quote of Jocelyn Warren, that in a pandemic, it's all fine until it's not. That's a very insightful quote, Karen. I found that quote to be true in business startups. It's all fine until it's not. In my physical health, it's all been fine until it's not. And in relationships I've had. So I hope, I wanted to just say that lightly because that is a truism regardless of its application. I also wanted to thank Commissioner Farr for reminding me who Walter Cronkite is. I'm guessing some of the people listening might not have a clue. And I also want to say that I agree with Commissioner Bozovich that one of the things COVID has done is it's illuminated disparities and in some cases poor logic in our current system. But I have a comment and a question. I have a concern. Karen, you mentioned that state resources we will receive before federal resources. I've heard many people complaining that dollars had been allocated and not received. There's something called the time value of money, especially amongst populations of great need and vulnerability. Is that an issue, or is that just something I'm hearing? And because I would just think in this day and age, we ought to be able to deliver dollars as close to immediately as we can. And I don't hear or see that happening. Am I inaccurate in that regard?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, I absolutely agree. There's a time value of money, and that's a piece for us here at the county and the EOC of why we have been so motivated to prioritize getting money out. So for instance, that early small business loan program that Austin pulled together with the cities of Eugene and Springfield, we knew that there was likely going to be federal money coming at some point, but people needed that assistance right away. And so wherever possible, our commitment is to expediting getting those resources moving. In the example of the rent assistance, since the state e-board money is able to come to us quickly, we'll turn that around and get that out into the community. We know there are people who will still need the federal money if it doesn't come until later in June. As soon as we have access to those funds, we'll turn those around as well. So yes, I think many of us would be able to provide a critique of how the federal government is or isn't moving money out to individuals and businesses quickly enough. So for the piece that we can control, which is what we have here in the county, our commitment is to making sure people get those resources as soon as possible.
Thank you. I would greatly appreciate when we are through and on the other side of all of this, perhaps you could share with us your thoughts or in a report form on the good and the bad and the areas for improvement as it relates to that one piece, right? Which is just getting money to those in need. But that's not for now. The other thing, since you mentioned it, Karen, I really have to footnote this. You discussed Austin being able to pull together that $400,000 small business loan fund. I mean, that's something that I was pushing when Sarah Means was in that position. I think it is terrible that it took this kind of a situation to initiate something that has been needed for a long time. My understanding is in 24 minutes, that $400,000 small business loan fund was entirely subscribed. I applaud you using that to try and generate more. I think $675,000 is not even a drop in the bucket of what is needed. And I commend you in that it's clear to me anyway that you are trying to structure that as grants rather than loans for further encumbrance. The least able to repay additional debt are small businesses. I observe that you said an equity lens. And I think let's be clear about what an equity lens means. That means that you're trying to deliver money to areas that the market has somewhat excluded. So in a sense, and I'm not against this, I'm just saying, in a sense, what you are trying to do is to run counter, because the people, again, that are most marginal anyway are the people that are being impacted the greatest by this particular event. You can comment or not. That's the end of my comments, and I appreciate the time.
Chair Buck and Commissioner Burney, I will take just a moment to talk a little bit more about this particular business program, and I am really hopeful that Business Oregon will see their way clear to fully fund our application, because I think it is exciting in the work that it's doing in terms of equity. And I know you had some constructive criticism for us, which was fantastic after that first program, and asking, what did we do to specifically assist those disadvantaged businesses who might be left behind from that initial program. And so in this next round, we are committed to, in particular, looking at that Latinx community and what supports we can provide. We've partnered with a Latinx serving nonprofit to create specific support strategies for applicants to not only make sure that we have materials translated into Spanish, but really helping people troubleshoot the application process, doing a call campaign to notify people about the opportunity, doing some webinars to support people who may not be as accustomed to working through these processes, to really provide that equity piece. So I appreciate the constructive criticism and want you to know that we've incorporated that moving forward.
And I can see that, and my highest regards for doing that, Karen. It's just it's so little, right, in terms of the real issue, but it's something, and thank you very much.
Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear Walter Cronkite come up, because he hired my dad way back in the 50s at CBS. So going full circle here. I just want to say I really appreciate the focus on business that's been going on. But I do want to note that this board at one time took one-time money. I can't remember if it was federal or the Comcast settlement, and with a matching federal grant, started a $1 million revolving loan fund through LCOG that's fully subscribed a couple of years back. So it's not like we have not paid attention to small business loans, and somehow or another this 400,000 was the first time we did it. So that's something we've been thinking about for quite a long time. I want to spend a minute, Pat talked about Jason. I just want to say a big thanks to Judy Williams. Speaking of business, I have passed more questions on to her in the last week as phase one was coming into being about specific businesses that couldn't quite understand the guidelines. Did they fit or did they not fit? And she's managed to get those answers from the team at the EOC or other staff and get those back within like 24 hours to the businesses that had those questions, or direct them to where to go. And I just want to say thank you, Judy, for that work. And even somebody from Territorial Sports that was, curious about whether or not they could start their baseball program this summer and where they fit into the guidelines. She managed to figure out where they fit under the summer camp guidelines and being a non-contact sport. So just want to say thank you to Judy. As we're looking at, quote, the second wave and all that stuff, one of the things is we have the knowledge the first wave has brought us. And I think one of the things that we are learning very quickly is COVID-19 is an age discriminatory disease. The mortality rate by age varies greatly statistically. And basically, if you're under age 75, its mortalities are closer. In fact, if you get under age 65, the mortalities are basically like the common flu, influenza. It's not until you get into the age 80 range that you really see that 4% mortality rate that everybody was concerned about. The other thing we're seeing is very promising treatments. My aunt was in her 80s and suffers from Alzheimer's, so is immunocompromised, was diagnosed with COVID-19 last week and had a co-occurring diagnosis of MRSA. And we thought for sure we were going to lose her, was put on a ventilator. She was given a blood transfusion from somebody that recovered, not a transfusion, but a plasma transfusion for the antibodies. And they're getting ready to take her off of her respirator. So that treatment wasn't even thought of 3 months ago, the plasma transfusion. And we're seeing other treatments that are coming into being. So we're not walking into a second wave like we walked into the first wave, or worse yet, how Italy walked into the first wave. So I think we've learned an awful lot, and I have confidence that our medical professionals and our public health folks, and that now people understand, everything that Steve was saying about social distancing, wash your hands, don't touch your face, stay home if you're sick. People are hearing that over and over again. So I'm not as concerned maybe as Commissioner Sorensen about that second wave. The other thing we have going for us is testing capacity. We walked into the first wave with god-awful testing capacity. We had none, basically. 50 tests a week, maybe, in Lane County. Now we're up to 350 tests in a day. It's pretty impressive. And what I'm hoping for, understanding COVID a little bit better, and the vulnerability of our senior population, and folks, particularly in group home settings as seniors, that when we're talking about some of this testing that we're doing that is not for symptomatic people, that we are going to concentrate some of that testing into those senior facilities, and particularly the staff at those facilities and the residents, to keep that vulnerable population where there's a high mortality rate safe. Because I think if we can maintain their safety, the rest of society can kind of get back to some semblance of normal. And that's what and I just kind of wonder, as Karen's thinking about all this, if she has any comment on the changes from first wave to what we'll see maybe in second wave in the fall.
Thanks, Chair Buck and Commissioner Bozovich. First of all, thank you very much for lifting up Judy Williams. I think it's an amazing amount of organizational effort that has gone into this response, and so many individuals from across the county have done just a fantastic job. So when this is all over, and I think it might have been Commissioner Burney who talked about being on the other side, we will be able to appropriately celebrate the contributions of so many people across the organization. So in terms of where we are now compared to where we were, I would absolutely echo your sentiments about the importance that testing brings to us. I think at this meeting last week, we talked about, perhaps that being the radar, I think was the analogy that was made, to be able to help us assess what's going on in the community. So that has been a critical tool in our toolbox to be able to test people. And then from the beginning of this epidemic, we have been doing contact tracing for all of those individuals who test positive. And what we know is how important it is right away to get on top of the transmission so that we can shut those circles down. And so I think those tools in our toolbox are going to be critical while we hopefully get a vaccine that will eventually be able to support our efforts in community. So yes, we have many more tools in our toolbox than going into a second wave than we had in the first. I would never want the community to feel complacent about that because it can so quickly get out of control if transmission begins in the community. So it's important for people to be vigilant. And yes, we are better equipped now than we were going into this.
Any other comments or questions? I'll just add that in this process, as you mentioned in the very beginning, Ms. Gaffney, about the increased mobile outreach, in the future, I just foresee a more robust mobile outreach team. I don't know how many people we currently have, but we're going to have to be out there more and more, especially as social distancing is still an issue and we can't have as many people in congregate settings as we used to. And people are moving, as we move into the summertime, people generally disperse a little bit more, but still being able to connect with them is so vital in making sure that we plan for future services for them with our social service agencies that do so much of this on the grounds work. So I was wondering, first, how many people do we have in our mobile outreach team and how can we beef that up?
Thank you, Chair Buck. That's a great question. And I don't have an exact number to give you today. What I will tell you, the approach we've been doing to the mobile outreach efforts has been really in coordination with the cities of Eugene and Springfield, and then private partners, both with Whitebird and Carry It Forward in particular. We have some Lane County staff who have formed a rural outreach team, and again, if I were to give you an exact number, I know I would be wrong, but let's say a handful of people who have been systematically doing that rural work. And then in addition to the staff at the City of Eugene and work that Springfield and Whitebird have provided as well. I think the important part for me is that we've been able to collect some really good data and feedback. If we think about some of this work has almost been a pilot project for what we had talked about before in terms of rural outreach. So I think we've learned a lot about what type of training and what type of knowledge, skill, and ability we should recruit for people to be effective on those outreach teams, how best to resource them in the community, and then how to connect across the region with that. And I want to really thank our private partners in particular for helping us with that piece. And I know Sarai talked some at, I think it was budget committee meeting last week, where we talked a little bit about our mobile outreach, and that will be a piece that will be an important part of our efforts moving into this next year, while we don't have an additional shelter open, to really find ways to reach people effectively, not only help them be able to maintain where they are, but really do that motivational interviewing part and engagement with people that we know will help them move them into services. And you may recall the data that we looked at from the Fuse project a year ago, that while getting people housed was the gold standard and really yielded amazing results, along the pathway, even just getting effective engagement improved the outcomes for people. So we know that that makes a difference. And so that's going to be a critical piece of our strategy moving forward.
Absolutely. I look forward to more information on that as it develops throughout the year. And it's just a big reminder to us all throughout the community how much our social service, private partners, nonprofits all support this work. And we need to support them in return, especially during these really tough times. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you again, Chair Buck. I don't mean to make light of this. I mean, this is a great reckoning for our society. But I think there's always an opportunity to turn a lemon into lemonade. And it sounds to me, Karen, that many of the efforts that this is forcing, much of the new thinking, the different type of spending, all can form. I'm going to give you, I can't do this, but I'm almost going to request another assignment. These are all a bunch of pilot projects in my mind. And whether we are talking about telemedicine from being used more by our docs, whether we're talking about the kind of mobile outreach that you are discussing that the chair said needed to be quote unquote beefed up, whether we're talking about innovative ways to navigate and engage So I am hoping to contribute to that, but also to, again, on the other side of this pandemic, which has hardly touched Lane County, by the way. I mean, when you look at the national statistics, it's frightening, but we are in as good a place as we possibly could be in. I'm going to suggest that we look at non-institutional, much more cost-effective, and much more neighborhood-based ways to engage people, navigate, identify where they are at and what their needs are really, train a cadre of our residents to become para-navigators, if you would, knowing the resources of cities and counties and their communities, being able to navigate their neighbors and friends. And I think we're developing a rich database to be able to talk about such a program as we're on the other side of this. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen and then Commissioner Farr.
Thank you so much. Karen, I just wanted to ask you a question about the emails that go out to the public and to the news media regarding the number of cases. And I know that the testing update includes the number of positive test results. I assume that means people that have the disease. It includes the number of 2 suspected deaths and the number of cases that have been conducted for Lane County residents. Commissioner Burney said that he was interested in how this is affecting different groups of people. Is there any way that you could provide data, maybe not on a daily basis, but on an occasional basis, to indicate the ages of the people or the racial and socioeconomic numbers? My sense is that the national picture of poor people, working people, frontline workers getting it, and people like myself that that have the ability to work from home not getting it. And so I'm just curious whether you have that data, whether it could be released on a monthly basis, or to get a picture of who is being affected by this disease in our community.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, absolutely. And in fact, we post that information on our website because I think there are many in the community who are curious about that. So if people who are watching want to find that data, you can go to the Lane County website, lanecounty.org, and then there's a link on the front page to our coronavirus website. And if you follow that link, and then you can go to the data page, and that actually pulls from our database, and people there can get information about age of people who have tested positive, as well as our general numbers. You can look at charts about our cumulative testing that happens in the community. And there's zip code information, so you can see where in the community our positive tests are located, as well as ethnicity data. So we do keep that up to date and available to the public on our website.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Commissioner Burney, I was writing down some things that I was going to say, and then I heard the words coming out of your mouth, so I quit writing. You were talking about pilot programs and how some things feel like a pilot program more than Ms. Gaffney suggested, which Ms. Gaffney is aware of all of them. We are able to do things right now because of the nature of the emergency that we had only dreamed of doing before. And you stated earlier regarding economic stimulation that it's terrible, the word used, that it took an event of this magnitude to make us do something. Well, a number of things we've simply been waiting for because we didn't have the reason to put it ahead of other things that were already slated. And now we have a reason to put some of these things ahead. And we're providing pilot programs, as you said, and as Ms. Gaffney said, that help us to understand things more clearly so that after we pass through the current emergency, we'll be able to move the programs forward at a rapid pace. You mentioned telemedicine, for instance. Isn't that an amazing possibility, what we can do there? Reaching out to Oak Ridge so people don't have to drive in here to get their treatment. But I will say that in behavioral health, we have talented behavioral health specialists who do tremendous work for their patients, their clients, but they have a big no-show ratio. People have scheduled appointments and they don't get in because ride share doesn't work, because they don't have a ride to get in. Telemedicine, mental health or behavioral health is also a supreme tool for giving people the reason to be at their appointments and receive the treatment that we know how to give, that we would just like to give if people can show up. So the future is bright in terms of some of the things that we are doing now that we'll be able to do in perpetuity. And I'm very, very excited about that. The one last thing I'd like to say, Ms. Gaffney, and this is directed to you, Commissioner Sorensen has suggested that you need to be more forthright. That's a quote. And if you can find ways to be more forthright than you are, find more ways to put more stuff on the website, more zip codes on the website, more information regarding who's receiving treatment, please write a book. I will buy it.
All right, yeah, I've been on many of those press conferences we have. We used to have them quite often, every day, and now they're on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30, unless we get preempted from the governor, which we've gotten preempted from the governor on her own press releases, or press conferences the last few weeks. But I can say that we've been out there as much as I think we possibly can be with the factual information that we have at that particular moment, and we just know it changes every single day. I appreciate all your hard work and all the EOC's hard work, Ms. Gaffney.
Thank you very much, everyone. It has been an honor to be doing this work in the community, and I do look forward to really celebrating when we get on the other side. And I would just say, when I listen to Commissioner Burney talk about lemonade, I have had many conversations with the county administrator about making sure that no good crisis gets wasted, and that we are able to take everything possible that's positive out of this experience.
Very good. Well, at this rate, we're doing much better on time than we have in the past. And I did, in the agenda team meeting, bump out the discussion on the Emergency Rental Assistance Fund to the afternoon, not knowing how much we would be discussing in the morning time. But we have, one order in front of us, and then I'll leave it kind of up to everybody if we want to push that back into the morning meeting. So think about that in the background while I move on to item 6B, order 20-05-19-02, in the matter of approving an option agreement with Homes for Good Housing Agency for purchase of 4 lots at 13th Avenue and Tyler in Eugene for permanent supportive housing, and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute and approve the agreement. And we still have with us Ms. Gaffney and Director of Homes for Good, Jacob Fox. Feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Jacob, are you on the line?
Yep, I'm on, Karen.
Excellent. Okay, well, I know this is a continuation of a prior discussion that we've had with the board, and we're at this exciting moment of actually moving forward on this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacob to present an update and this request.
Sure, thanks, Karen. So as the Lane County Commissioners know, we received a grant award of $3.75 million from the Oregon Housing and Community Services. So in terms of project status, we've completed the initial design schematic phase. We had an excellent Zoom meeting with the neighborhood on April 23rd. And also with the Jefferson Westside neighborhood Ted Koopman, who's the current chair, is kind of our point of contact. So one of the things that we're starting to do with neighborhood associations in particular, is obviously frequently update neighborhood associations as to the progress of our projects. But we also ask for a point person from those neighborhood associations to kind of be our conduit and advisor as to how we engage and how we share information. So that meeting went really well. There's no major, there's no opposition to the project. Ted is just welcoming, Ted and the rest of the neighborhood association is welcoming the project with open arms. They did give us some feedback on some elements of design, including landscape design. So we'll fold that into the next iteration of the design and make tweaks based on the input from the neighborhood. So in terms of getting a construction company on board, we've gone through a procurement process, and staff will be recommending to the Homes for Good board tomorrow that we hire Essex Construction as our contractor, and getting them on board is really important so we can get into the cost estimating portion of the projects. And I mentioned design, so we did also work with eWeb. There's an easement that eWeb has on the property that's actually fairly large. So we're kind of working with them and our architects to basically design around that easement. We've submitted a Meyer Memorial Trust grant for $300,000 and just heard from them that we're sort of advancing in their competitive next steps. So we have a track record of getting Meyer Memorial grants for our projects. So we're hopeful that we're successful in that process. So the idea is over the next few months, work with our contractor, which we hope will be Essex, pending Homes for Good board approval tomorrow. And the idea is to submit for building permits this September. So this motion in front of you today just allows Homes for Good administration and real estate development staff to work with the county on basically negotiating an option agreement. And then the idea is that as the project budget comes into shape, we'll be actively communicating with Lane County. And then I think as it's flagged in this this presentation, basically we would need to come back to the Lane County board to talk about how the fairgrounds is reimbursed for that land. So I'll just pause there and see if Karen or Steve Mokorohysky have any additional things to add, or would like me to cover any other details that I may have forgotten.
Chair Buck, absolutely, there are no additional details. I think I just want to take a moment and really celebrate the fact that with everything that is happening in our community, we've just spent an hour talking about our emergency response, that through all of that, our partners at Homes for Good have really stayed focused on the mission of increasing housing options in our community, and made sure that this project continued to move along so that we were in a position to be able to execute on it and bring in the dollars that we need and get yet another step closer to housing families in our community who really need it. So I want to appreciate, Jacob, the work you and your team have been doing. It's really great.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. You know, I'll state regarding this particular project and its location. I think Mr. Manella, I think, is going to be with us for the afternoon presentation on rental. The rental discussion. He's not here right now, but he and I first started talking about it, a place for single families with children who currently don't have places to live or supportive housing to live in. We began talking about it probably 5 years ago, and this site actually came up at the time, and it was a long shot at the time. I'm very, very pleased, Ms. Gaffney, to see us moving forward with this, and Mr. Fox to see us moving forward with this in a way that really is going to very quickly provide some of the housing that we so badly need. Homes for Good is a perfect developer for this. We have, I think, Jacob, we have greater than 500 residences or front doors in the pipeline right now, and this is will be a number of them. So it's moving in an area that we dreadfully need to move, a place where people can, particularly people with families, small families, can live. I originally anticipated there would be a single parent household. We'll see how that goes, and I don't think there's much of a presentation on that right now. You know, I'm so excited about this, I can't even get my words out quick enough. The fact that you're looking at Essex Construction for the development of this, for the building. Essex Construction I have experience with, and a lot of the buildings, the various kinds of buildings that they built the new Fairfield Elementary School, for instance. If you drive by that, you can see the quality and the design that goes into the work that they do. When I became the executive director of Food for Lane County in 2003, we had a brand new building. It's not new anymore. In fact, it's their older building now, but it was built by Essex Construction also. You can see the kind of work that they put into it and the kind of diversity that they apply to the projects that they build. So, Ms. Gaffney, I said this before today, I think other commissioners will have questions that I would ask. I'm going to let them go ahead and ask them, and I'll come back if they don't. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Jacob or Ms. Gaffney? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Chair. This time I'd like to move approval of Order 20-05-19-02 as presented.
Is there a second? Is there a second? I'll call one more time for this particular order.
Well, I'm not going to let it die for want of a second, but I wanted to make the motion, so I will second it.
So,
sorry, I'm on mute.
Am I recognized, Chair?
I have Commissioner Bozovich next and in the queue, and then I can get you Commissioner Sorensen.
Just briefly, I'll state that my previous objections to this project being located on the Lane Event Center have not changed, and I will be voting against the motion.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that Mr. Koopman and the neighborhood group have been, as was mentioned, a very big partner on this project, which is located in my district. And I've been at the site many times, and I appreciate the hard work of Homes for Good and Lane County Department of Health and Human Services to follow up on the direction that the board has given. So I urge a aye vote on this matter. Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Part of what, thank you, Chair. part of what was just presented was something that I'm presuming is not part of this discussion, and that is the choice of Homes for Good. That will be, well, the proposed choice of Homes for Good of Essex Construction. So I'm not questioning that, but I do have a question about that process. I'm just curious, how do you choose a contractor without an estimate of the cost of construction? Because I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe I heard you say, Jacob, that after choosing the contractor, then you're going to get into what the costs will be. Did I mishear that?
No, you didn't. Normally we get an independent cost estimate in advance of running a procurement. And to be honest, I don't know whether we did that for this project. I can message Nora right now. And if I can't get an answer immediately, I can forward a kind of an update out to the board. But the selection for Essex is on the Homes for Good board agenda tomorrow. And I will certainly be prepared to answer that question in advance of that meeting tomorrow.
Okay, well, I only asked it because of how you presented, and in my experience, it's kind of hard to choose people until you know what they're going to cost. So that'd be great. The other thing that sounded, and again, I'm not saying this is the case, but to me, it sounded like it hadn't yet been thought through, which concerns me. And that was, I believe you said you will be looking forward to talking to us later about how the fairgrounds would be reimbursed for the land. Is that something that's not already negotiated and determined? Because I know that the Fair Board was not happy the way this was, I would say from their perspective, ramrodded through.
To quickly answer your question about the cost estimating, Joe, and we'll have a more concrete answer for you tomorrow. We've had we have a lot of projects currently under construction. So I think what we may have done is used basically the per unit cost estimates, or the per unit costs that for projects or units that are currently under construction that are similar in bedroom size. So that gives us a pretty good idea. To answer your question about how the fairgrounds will be reimbursed, the fact is, obviously the fairgrounds will be reimbursed, but we don't know if the money we've received from the state, plus if we're successful with the Meyer grant, would be able to absorb that cost or not. So that's something that we'll know in the coming couple months. And I don't know, Steve Mokrahysky, if there's anything you would add to that.
No, I mean, I think that covers it. We're committed to reimbursing. We've said that from the beginning, that we are going to reimburse the Lane Event Center fund for the purchase cost of that property originally. And, you know, as Mr. Fox said, we're working through what all the scenarios are. At the very least, we'll reimburse it from the general fund, but we're trying to determine what the best source of funding to reimburse Lane Event Center would be. But that is our commitment.
Okay. So just thank you, Chair. This is just following up based on the answers. So what I've heard is that depending upon funding sources and how things fall out, will be determined the how the fairgrounds would be reimbursed. But I've yet to hear, has not a price been determined? Has not a fair market value been established? Or do we know the what, not just the how?
Yeah, well, I will just say we know the purchase price of the property, and I don't want to cite that number because I don't know it exactly, okay. And so I don't want to give you the wrong number, but right. We know what the purchase price was, and I now forget the year. There were three tax lots that were purchased. They all had a different value to them that make up this site, and so that is our plan, is to reimburse the purchase amount.
Oh, the purchase amount, not the current
right.
Fair market value?
Yeah, I mean, we can do an appraisal. I don't know. We haven't held the property for that long.
Okay.
It's certainly possible that it is, you know, appreciated in that period of time. But yeah, our plan was, I thought we'd had that discussion with the board previously, that the plan was to reimburse the purchase amount.
We have. I was just wondering how we establish how much and if that's occurred yet. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Any other comments, discussion on the motion? Commissioner Farr, did I see your hand up earlier and I didn't catch it? No, you're good. Okay, this is, I just want to remind everybody this is an option. So it sounds like if the option is executed, it will come back to the board again. Is that right, Jacob?
Yeah, I don't know the exact mechanics the kind of Lane County administration will use, but I do know that that come back to the board.
And Chair, I'll just say that it likely would come back to the board as part of, I'll talk to Ms. Moody about this, and but likely as part of one of our supplemental budget updates that we would include that transfer of funds during that one of those 4 supplemental budgets that you have each year.
Okay, any other discussion? I don't see any, so I'll call for the vote. We are looking at order 20-05-19-02 as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozovich in the nay. So before we started this particular order, I'd mentioned that we have more time today than we've had before, and wanted to pose it to the board if we wanted to move up the item, the discussion on emergency rental assistance fund. Commissioner Farr, you had mentioned that Mr. Manila might call in, and I was, we discussed this last week, and it was just going to be a board discussion, but I was trying to encourage folks to have some input, and we did get a brief memo from Mr. Manila. So what are thoughts about moving that particular item up from folks? Anybody? Thoughts?
I'm fine moving it up, Chair Buck. I'm prepared.
Okay, a yes from Commissioner Bozovich. How about Commissioner Sorensen, Commissioner Burney? Okay with moving it up?
I'm okay with moving it up. There may be people that want to watch it that will have to watch it on video, but I'm okay if you want to, in managing the meeting, move forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, I'm outvoted.
All right.
I was gonna do some boning up, but that's okay. I mean,
Well,
whatever is the will of.
Change mine then. I don't want to force this on anyone. My suggestion in having this meeting was that we, take care of it as a board discussion, and I want to make sure people have a chance to prepare things.
If I may, thank you very much for the consideration, Commissioner Sorensen. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I'm good either way. It's whatever the will of the chair is in terms of your managing the meeting. My real concern isn't me not being prepared as much as it is. I've heard that there are a lot of people that were interested in this discussion, and I have told them it would occur at 1:30, but you can't tell what's going to happen, so they could always see it on tape.
Commissioner Farr.
And I will let your decision ride on this, Chair Buck. I agree with Commissioner Burnett. There are a lot of people that I have personally talked to who are very interested in this item also, and would pay close attention as we debate it or discuss it.
Mr. Mokrahysky, do you have any input on if there was somebody, Mr. Manila was going to join us on this particular item?
He did not get an invite, I don't believe. We certainly can invite him to attend, but the board had just asked for a board discussion, not for staff. So I'd say you have a memo with some information, and that's probably all you need to have the conversation at this point.
Commissioner Farr.
This is not an action item and just a discussion item, it probably makes it less important that staff be involved because it is just a board discussion. So once again, Chair, I will work with whatever you put forward.
Me too, Heather. Whatever you want.
All right. Well, it's 10:40. I feel like in order to move on with our meeting for today, it would make sense from time perspective that we've got Metro with us, and we're already in the middle of a meeting, that we go ahead and move that one up for expedience sake. So let's move then to item 12A, which is a discussion on emergency rental assistance fund. We put 60 minutes in here, but whatever time it takes, we didn't really know how much discussion would be had. There is a view material item attached to it, which is a memo from Mr. Manila, and it outlines some information about what is currently happening with rental assistance fund. But Commissioner Sorensen, why don't you kick this off? This was one of your work session items.
Thank you. I want to thank the board for setting up a time to discuss the pros and cons, as I phrased it, of a rental assistance program. It appears that there are state and federal funds to augment whatever local money we might put into a rental assistance fund. And so I think that the memo that Mr. Manella wrote, which is dated May 15 and was updated onto the Board of Commissioners website yesterday, does provide for some report on what we're anticipating coming in. I think follow-up to this meeting should be that we get a presentation from Mr. Manella on that. The other thing I wanted to say is that that the impact on renters of the economic fallout of COVID-19 has been really phenomenal, really hurting lots and lots of people. And a component of our existing homelessness emergency is that many of these people could well be homeless if we are not taking efforts, as we have in the past, as the memo points out, and in response to the discussion last Thursday, I believe it was, might have been Wednesday, of the Budget Committee about the board previously in other times providing assistance to renters, that we need to make sure we're doing that in this instance as fully as we possibly can. I think everyone might agree on most of what is being planned by staff. So I want to move into areas that have not been covered that do assist renters and are part of our overall response to the economic crisis, and particularly how it affects the thousands and thousands of people that are renting. And those are the issues brought up in the public comment this morning. And that would include things like making sure that the laws are followed and that the requirements that have been set down by the courts or by court rulings or the governor's executive orders are being followed. We're getting all these reports that people are at least fearing that somebody's taking advantage of them during this crisis. And I think we need to establish some kind of discussion or report from staff, or involve the representatives of the rental community. You know, this CETA organization is a really good, well-balanced advocacy group for renters. And I think that hearing from them directly should be an outcome of today's discussion. So those are some of my thoughts, and thanks for supporting having this discussion.
Anybody have any thoughts to add? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I am pleased to see some of the funding help that's coming down through the federal government and the state for rental assistance. And I do believe our staff in the Human Services Division is capable of making sure that gets to the proper nonprofit, or even setting up the distribution of those funds themselves, as they have done with other funds that come in from federal and state sources for various assistance to folks that are having trouble paying bills, whether it's the energy assistance program or now this rental assistance. So I don't know if there's a lot for the board to do there. I think there's staff activity to do. As far as some of the enforcement of landlord-tenant law and any sort of county sort of ordinances to act on landlord-tenant, I'm not really in favor of that. There are state agencies that are charged with that, from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, also federal agencies and HUD that already have that authority and jurisdiction to take in complaints. In fact, there's even a fair housing hotline that the state has to take in complaints and then deal with those. And as the most familiar with those laws, probably the fastest way to be dealt with. I will say that one of the best things we can do for renters right now is help them get back to work. You know, my wife finally got into a service industry yesterday for an appointment, and all the practitioners there to a person had not received any of their unemployment yet, even though the person that was serving my wife had applied the day of the governor's order when they closed down her industry, and still has not received a single unemployment check. The only way she made it was with the $1,200 stimulus check that managed to pay her rent and her insurance, and then she had to go on food stamps to feed her family. You know, if that person now at least is back at work partially, earning an income, but it'd sure be great if they can get that. You know, she thinks she's owed about $5,000 now in unemployment from the state. So if we get the state to pay their unemployment, that'd be a whole lot of rental assistance right there. But getting people back to work, I think, is more important, because then they're not building up any additional unpaid rent as a liability. And I think that's really what we should concentrate on. We should continue lobbying for additional funding from federal and state sources. We just do not have a resource in Lane County to fund rental assistance. And you know, we're in the middle of the budget cycle right now. And I think you all are aware, any ads right now, you have to pick out what you're going to subtract, you know, and what you're going to not do if you want to add something. So if we're going to add rental assistance funding from a county source, we need to identify how you're going to pay for it and what you're going to cut.
Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Farr.
Commissioner Bozovich, what you were mentioning, by the way, in terms of unemployment, is part of what I was referring to the time value of money. You know, by the time people get it, you know, they will have gone through the worst. And frankly, I also like your idea about one form of rental assistance is to get this unemployment money on time. I think rental assistance is important, and I think going back to work is important. My understanding is that right now, the eviction moratorium will be lifted July 1st. I think that's correct. And if that's correct, and this money that we just learned about, I literally learned about it a few hours before we received that memo on the Human Services Commission with Commissioner Farr. I was so elated and delighted, because here we were going to be talking about a rental relief fund. We don't have any money allocated from the county for a rental relief fund. And now we have, as a result of county staff work, a good amount of money that's going to be in a rental relief fund. So having said all that, I would like to see what the plan for the allocation of that is going to be before the eviction moratorium is lifted on July 1st. So, you know, how it's going to be allocated, how the funds are going to be distributed, how July 1st eviction moratorium will impact that. We already know Mr. Manella has provided us some of the funding sources. He also has indicated yesterday he's going after other funding sources for rental relief. And some of the dollars that he discussed with us in his memo could be used for rental relief, but they could be used for other things too. So I'd be really interested to know really what that breakdown is going to be. hoping rental relief is the priority for it. And just so this Board of Commissioners has a chance to look at what that plan is, and also to invite some of the primary deliverers of rental relief to look at that plan with us before July 1st and when the proverbial stuff hits the fan. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a discussion only item, but it's a good chance for us to bring up some things that we potentially need to get into the pipeline for further discussion. You know, we're all attuned to the recommendations of the shelter feasibility study, and we're moving ahead on many of the recommendations of the shelter feasibility study. Item 6 is expand and increase utilization of tenancy supports. Now that's a little broader than just rental support. However, we all know, and anybody who's read any paper on this at all understands that one of the great sources of homelessness, of people in the homelessness pipeline, are people who have lost the ability to pay their rent. And we all know, it's not speculation, it's not rhetorical, we all know that people today are in danger of being evicted for non-payment of rent. If we want to spend a great deal of money in the future trying to get people back into housing that may be non-existent, then let's not pay any more attention to this at all. But if we really want to take seriously the recommendation that we increase tenancy supports, one of the great tenancy supports is making sure that people have a little gap, a little stopgap that prevents them from falling into eviction, from being kicked out of their houses. We all also know that rental in Oregon, excuse me, in Eugene and Springfield in particular, is very high, higher than mortgages. You know, I'll bet that anybody in this meeting right now who's paying a mortgage would probably pay more if they tried to get their house in rent, or if they wanted a 3-bedroom apartment, for instance, in rent, they'd probably pay more than they're paying for their mortgage. We know rents are high. We know availability of units is low. Our vacancy rate, we have a very low vacancy rate, which makes it a landlord's market. They can kind of do what they want, which is, you know, I'm not going to provide any commentary on that. But if we are going to be serious about expanding and increasing utilization of tenancy supports, this is something we need to have a very serious discussion about. And it's something that when we come to the table, we need to bring people to the table who've analyzed it from the renter's point of view and who've analyzed it from the landlord's point of view, because without the two coming together, it's going to be very difficult to have a long-lasting solution. And I think we have the voices in our community that can come together and work on something that's going to work for the long term. It may be a fund that we draw from to help people. We already have such a fund. It's a tiny one, by the way. We have such a fund that we can help people with a month's rent or half month's rent. But really a robust fund that keeps people out of homelessness. I think we have to have that discussion. And Commissioner Sorensen, a little bit earlier in the meeting, you say that this is kind of a preliminary to what may be future discussions with more staff involved, more external sources involved. I'm looking forward to that because we have got to have a solution. Otherwise, our homelessness pipeline will be expanded significantly. The valve will be opened.
I have a lot of opportunity here, I think, with this particular discussion, especially in Lane County, where we have Representative Fahey, who is now the head of the Housing Board, the legislative committees at the state level. We also have a landlord-tenant coalition at the state level that advocates for a lot of changes in landlord-tenant law. And we have some pretty strong folks here in Lane County that participate on that particular coalition. We also, on the legislative side, we also have something I think that our legislative committee could bring up when we're talking about what's going on in the next session regarding housing. So I feel like there's a lot of potential here, and that's aside from the fact that we are getting some funding from state and federal resources, as Mr. Manila has shared with us in his memo. I too support having a follow-up conversation regarding this, because we need to keep people in their homes. We don't need any more people on our street. And however we can do that, I think it's our moral imperative to help from the county level as much as we can. Commissioner Sorensen, I saw your hand up again, I believe.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I think we're coalescing around several things. The first is that the method by which the county allocates the money apparently is within our authority. So we could give it to the wealthiest renters in the county on the theory that they need the most money. We could give it to the very poorest people. And I would suggest that we think about giving it to people who are at risk of homelessness, that's the policy directive that fits in with our homelessness, our designated homelessness emergency. It fits in with the TAC report, keeping people in their homes. And I think that that is a policy question, and we need to have guidance from staff. We need to have opinions from other people, but we need to make sure that we're ready to distribute these funds in accordance with our very specific community needs that have been identified by this previous work we've done. Second, I think Commissioner Buck, Chair Buck, you've highlighted another concern for a future discussion, and that is how much of this responsibility to help tenants during this crisis, how much of this responsibility is a local government responsibility, and how much of it is a state government responsibility? We know that some local governments in Oregon have already taken the lead and taken efforts to try to protect tenants using the authority that they have in their own charter or their own legal authority. And having a pointed discussion in which our legal counsel and those other people in the community that are knowledgeable about the work that Multnomah County in particular has done using their charter authority, I think would be a great way of discerning what would we be asking the legislature to do as opposed to what can we do. And then finally, this has a immense, and I think Commissioner Bozovich mentioned this, this has an immense impact on our legislative program coming up in the short term, meaning any special sessions that might occur between now and January, and then obviously in January with the annual, the meeting, the regular session of the Oregon legislature, and how much of the need we have that we cannot do ourselves, that we cannot afford to do or do not have the legislative power to do, that then gets devolved on the state legislature. And what's Lane County's leadership position? Because as Commissioner Buck noted, we've got members of our delegation that are poised and are anxious to help us. But we have to discern, in my view, what can local government do? What can we do now as a local government versus what can we ask for from our legislative delegation? So I really think that we've got a whole bunch of things to work on here. And I think that continued discussion and guidance from staff and opinion from staff on where issues are going. I'll close by just saying that with regard to the overwhelmingly large number of calls that have gone in, over 50,000 phone calls have gone in to the Oregon Employment Division asking for assistance. And the vast majority of the people calling have hung up. And if you just use a simple 10% figure on the number, that means 5,000 people have tried to get access. And we might want to think about, in our response to all of this, we might want to think about, as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, we might want to think about broadening our response to this to help renters by seeing if there's some energy that Lane County government could provide. And we do this in the public safety context by funding state positions in the custody release function at the jail. Maybe we could do that if we had the resources. I'm not sure we do, but to help get these phone calls answered and see if we can get these people the unemployment benefits, many of whom are renters. So it fits in with an overall response to renter relief and renter assistance. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr and then Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I'll be brief. You know, we can talk about this and talk around this a lot, and we can present political points of view, but in reality, this is a human issue. These are people. There's men and women and children and families who are suffering, who are potentially going to be evicted. If late last night, we all got an email from Lori Halber, who is an attorney with legal aid here in Lane County. I think most of us know Lori. Very well-researched email that came with a series of recommendations regarding rental. Beyond the recommendations that Ms. Halber presented, we have to begin to look even further. Why does it cost so much to build here in comparison to median income here? And why don't we have enough land available to make housing less expensive? Why do builders pay so much before they can even put a shovel in the ground for building new housing? All of these things are a part of how do we get people into housing. But immediately, and right now I'll say it one more time, we have a pipeline whose valve is due to be open wide if we're not careful. And if we don't pay attention to some details right now, we're going to have a whole lot more kids and families who are going to be homeless subsequent to the COVID pandemic.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the email from Ms. Halber that Commissioner Farr referenced has a lot of good points in it. And I would look forward to a continuing discussion around this, around how this can get to Legislative Affairs Task Force, how the county can advocate as best as we can, and looking at the other issues she brings up. Having said that, one thing concerns me, and that is this discussion. Right now, we have to be talking about relief. I understand that. But until we start talking about creating jobs and what types of jobs we're creating and what the role of government is in incenting market investment for the creation of those jobs, as opposed to relief methodology, which is you pay for 100% of everything from the government pot, and your money doesn't go as far. So relief, yes, we have to step up. I'm 100% for the recommendations in Ms. Halber's email to us that several of us seem to be referencing or looking at, because these points sound familiar to me. And at the same time, I think that we also, in terms of economic development, need to stop focusing so much on just giving a little bit of money to this group that's doing this thing in this community, which is important, and start looking at the strategy for utilizing public incentives to incent private investment so that we can stop living in such an undercapitalized county. And thank you very much.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I know that, folks want to bring this down to some of these things that are in Lori's letter down to the county level and have us regulating that. But I just want to remind folks that even though we have broad authority as a home rule charter county, it would be a new segment of regulation for the county. We do not currently do any sort of landlord tenant regulation or housing regulation. So it would require new staff and resources at a time where we're balanced on the head of a pin and probably going to, because of future problems with revenue in the state, have issues with needing to make cuts in the future. So I just want to make sure everybody understands, while we may have authority.
Did not do what we discussed, and that changed the entire dynamic of this.
Commissioner Burney, you're not on mute.
Sorry about that.
So, you know, while we may have very broad authorities under the Home Rule Charter, you know, if we create regulation, then we have to create staff to enforce. You know, and it's right now we can't. You know, we're requiring our noise ordinance to be enforced by civil action because we have no way of enforcing noise ordinance with staff. You know, that's sort of what you're setting up is creation of regulation with no enforcement capacity behind it if we go that direction. I also want to remind folks that, you know, a lot of that fair housing actually falls under the Bureau of Labor and Industries. And I think Commissioner Val Hoyle is capable of handling a lot of those issues. You know, having been, you know, House 14 representative here and, you know, a very capable person coming from our community and is well aware of our issues here in Lane County. So I think we can also count on her support in that. So I want to say I really appreciate the suggestions. I want to focus more on the idea of the Emergency Rent Assistance Fund and making sure that gets done correctly. And it's similar to our Energy Assistance Fund. It's not going to go to the richest energy users. It went by need and means testing. And we're not, you know, EWEB, who we work with on the Energy Assistance Fund, doesn't do the means testing. We have other people that do the means testing and set that up. So I think we can trust staff to set that up and distribute those funds where they're most needed. I do agree with Commissioner Sorensen. You know, means testing and risk of homelessness should be high factors in distribution of those funds. But I do think we can start cutting off the need for it by getting people back to work. And I think the state can help out a lot if they can get their unemployment system up to speed. I think the claim that 87% of people have gotten their claims processed, from what I'm talking to people, I'm not talking to anyone that's received checks so far. So I kind of question that 87% claim. So we just need to get those checks flowing, because unemployment is something that your employers paid for. It's an insurance program. It's not an entitlement. It's not a giveaway. As somebody that's been working, you are entitled to receive that compensation when you become unemployed, because through your work and your paychecks and paycheck withholding, you've been paying for that all along. And it's, you know, it's an embarrassment that we have people that have not received those checks. And if we can get those flowing, I think that's a huge rental assistance portion right there.
Okay, well, we're having some excellent discussion. I might just add that I've long felt like the county, as we do more and more in housing, will need folks to focus on that particular ones. And we right now only share one part-time employee with the city of Eugene. That's Sarai Johnson, who is working on implementing the TAC report. And that's just one human working on these things. And there's a lot of work to do. I do know that Human Services works a lot around housing as well, but really in these, goes through these kinds of programs as Mr. Manila has done. But as housing becomes a bigger and bigger issue, and I don't see this issue diminishing anytime soon, if nothing else, it just continues to become more burdensome. And then the pandemic comes along and shows us how egregious some of the current policies are that are in place that is just simply inequitable for many people in our community. I feel like in the long run, we're on the right trajectory, but there's a lot of work to do. And some of that has to do in the housing department. The more we can partner with the cities and how to develop that, I think it will underscore some of the major issues that underlie the problem of housing scarcity in the first place. Mr. Mokryski, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. And I wanted to let the board have its conversation, and then I was going to provide this update under my announcements, but I think it's probably more appropriate here just to share with you that Ms. Gaffney talked about in the update earlier, the transition that we're making starting this week from our Emergency Operations Center focus on public health emergency response to COVID-19 to a recovery effort. So again, I'll say it doesn't mean that our public health efforts are stopping, but in terms of the large sort of EOC, Emergency Operations Center focus, over the next several weeks, our public health response efforts will transition back into the department and continue through the department's work. And we will have our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, will shift and is shifting to a focus on recovery. Understanding that we may at some point come back to an Emergency Operations Center that focuses on response if and when there's a second wave. But I wanted to just make a comment about the structure of that emergency recovery effort. We have a local disaster recovery manager and that is Patience Winningham. She will be serving right now to get this structure up and running, sort of like an incident commander and an emergency operations center. So Patience is our local disaster recovery manager, and we have 6 sections within that recovery plan. One is focused on economic recovery, and Austin Ramirez will lead that section. Another is focused on health and social services. Steve Manila will lead that section. A third is focused on housing, and that includes rental assistance as well as our TAC work. And that will be led by Sarai Johnson. And then we have an infrastructure section, which we're sort of calling out, but not really staffing at the moment. This would be for things like broadband and other economic infrastructure needs. We have a reentry task force led by Mike Finch for the reentry of our workforce, and then financial task force led by Robert Tintle to oversee the finances of all this work. So as it relates, I just wanted to call that out, and that we had a lot of debate between Ms. Gaffney and Patience Winningham and myself about should the housing piece live in the health and social services, and ultimately though housing is going to be a separate function. And I've appointed Sarai Johnson to serve as the lead of that section, again, to focus on rental assistance, as well as the implementation of our housing and shelter efforts. And as you noted, Chair, Sarai is a jointly funded position between the city and county, so it's really a shared role. There will be other resources and staffing in support of that section's work, and we really view that as a collaborative effort between Lane County, Eugene, Springfield, and other partners. But as the board thinks about where you would like us to focus, I just want you to be aware of that structure and where a lot of that work is going to be, from our standpoint and in partnership with our community partners, where that work is going to be housed. And we're housing it there because we really feel like this COVID-19 continues to be a catalyst to moving these efforts forward. And there's a lot of funding flowing from the federal and state governments. And so we want to make sure we're capturing that and strategizing around the best use of those resources and of our response efforts. So again, I'll just say, as you talk about where you'd like to focus from a policy standpoint, keep in mind those organizational efforts that we're focusing on and the people that are involved in that.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that housing is its own section to be worked on. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I think this has been very productive, and I think maybe part of the follow-up is to have Ms. Haugen come in and discuss some of the options she sees. Obviously, I think the memo from Steve Manella makes it clear that we should have a discussion with him about the priorities the board has for the distribution of the funds that we apparently are going to be receiving. And I also think we need to have Alex Kyler come in, possibly with Steve Dingle, come in to have them discuss what the legislature is doing, how we can best plug in, and also for Mr. Dingle, making it clear or more clear what the board's authorities are to protect renters during the pendency of this emergency that at least the board says will be lasting another month and a half. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So I just happen to have my budget book sitting next to me here. I kind of bristle a little bit that we only are putting a half of a person towards housing. We are planning to put in the upcoming year $19.5 million in our Human Services Division with 42 plus FTE. And that FTE went up not this year, but the previous year's budget by 2.5. And I believe half of that was for Sarai, but I believe the other 2 FTE were part of the TAC response and were hired in other positions. I think some work in outreach and coordination, we had positions there. So half a person is not what's working on housing in this county and those issues. So I just want to make that clear, and I don't want people to walk away with the thought that that's all we're doing for housing. I mean, we added 2.5 FTE, not this budget, but the last budget. And we're spending $19.5 million in human services that go across the expanse of needs of folks suffering poverty, which includes housing and rental assistance through some of the nonprofits we support, like Saisla Outreach Services in my district. So I just want to make that clear that we're not just putting a half FTE out there.
Commissioner Farr.
And I will take this opportunity to remind people that we do have a very robust, well-staffed Poverty and Homelessness Board, which is an intergovernmental committee, not a multi-jurisdictional, not intergovernmental. And we do a great deal of work on housing, including 6 different committees that work on housing. So really, Lane County, I've looked into a lot of counties in Oregon, and nobody puts as much effort into housing as Lane County, other than Multnomah County, which has a pretty deep set of pockets. So I agree with you, Commissioner Bozievich. We have a lot of people working on housing. Steve Manella alone has been doing it since the day I met him in 1995.
I think I just wanted to point out the fact that, you know, we have housing kind of lumped in with human services. It does a lot of other activities as well. Housing has unique attributes to it, and from a policy level and an advocacy level to the state legislator, it has some very specific needs. And I am a huge fan of having housing as something that is perhaps a different category than the categories that we usually have worked under as we develop as a county itself. And we don't have the same deep pockets that Multnomah does, or some large metro centers in the rest of the United States. And we are doing some really wonderful work here that are models elsewhere. And as we develop that, when we focus on housing, I just want us to know that, you know, it's my professional background. It has very different needs. And yes, they intersect with a lot of other industry needs, and including human services, and including our medical facilities and public safety and all that as well. But it needs special advocacy for housing specifically. And I see we're developing that, but we can of course always try to do more as we grow as a county. So I see us kind of revolving in and coalescing around a need or future discussion item with maybe Lori Haugen and Steve Manella and perhaps Alex Kyler as a follow-up to this particular discussion. Is that how everybody else is reading this?
With one tiny exception, it's Lori Hauber, H-A-U-B-E-R.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Yes, I think all of that is very valuable. The one thing that I would like to bring up is that both Ms. Hauber and Mr. Dingle will have a perspective on the authority of counties and what is within the authority of counties to specifically protect renters. And I think it's really important that we receive the views of all of them, because those that we choose not to embark on because we may not have the money to embark on it, those that we don't, then that becomes part of our legislative priorities. And I think Mr. Dingle, who the board relies upon for legal advice, could be helpful in making sure that what we might want to do locally is or is not within the power of a local government. Obviously, we have among the worst homeless problem of really any community of our size in the country. There are communities that are much bigger than ours that have really horrible homeless problems, but Lane County, as a metropolitan area, as a county, has among the worst of a community of our size. And so I think that having special attention to housing and what we can do locally and our regulatory authority is an important part of a follow-up. And then last but not least, I think, Chair Buck, you mentioned something that's been an issue for me for many years, and you encapsulated my thinking really well. And I just wanted to second this idea that I think is important for our future discussion, and that is whether we should have a housing agency or housing function that is in the Department of Health and Human Services, but it is not necessarily a component of mental health or other related areas, but is a major problem. And it's a major social problem in Lane County. And having a staff person, at least one, with that responsibility and clearly stated, I think would be an addition to our overall effort, and wouldn't be lumped in with important but somewhat different responsibilities that are in other elements of the Department of Health and Human Services. So I hope we get these discussions and reports ordered, and hope we have time to do it. And thank you for being willing to have this discussion today.
Any final thoughts to wrap up this discussion? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Murray.
Hey, I really apologize, by the way, when I was not muted. I apologize. I don't think our problem is housing. I think our problem is lack of housing. Just one point there. I also see, frankly, staff putting, for me, there's a bit of a disconnect here. Talk. Real significant issue. Staff putting a ton of work in and just got new resources for this. So I don't exactly know where we go from here, but I hope where we go is that we have informed discussion of how we're going to have use the resources we've got. I don't want to talk about a separate housing person unless I hear from Mr. Mokrahysky that given the whole organizational structure, that actually would mean that there's more of a focus and more action will occur. I mean, otherwise we're just talking about shifting the chairs on the Titanic. So all I want to say is I completely support what this entire board supports. I'd love to have 2 or 3 action steps that will come out of the next discussion. And I'm not disagreeing with many of the comments. I'm just trying to kind of get concise here and talk about how we go from here. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So we will move on in our agenda here to wrap up the morning. We have item 7A, County Council announcements. Are there any County Council announcements for today?
Steve asked me to share that he doesn't have any announcements.
Okay, and that's County Administration announcements.
Well, I shared one of the things I wanted to update the board on. So again, so you have an understanding of sort of the framework that we're transitioning our response and recovery efforts into. So we continue to put a lot of time into all of those areas that I mentioned, including our reentry work for our workforce. And we'll have more information to share on that. I wanted to also share with you, as today is election day, that our elections office has been open since 7 a.m. We'll be open until 8 p.m. tonight. Phones will be answered until 9 p.m. tonight. For walk-in customers, masks are required, and we are following a 6-foot physical distancing policy at our elections office. Voter turnout through Monday, May 18th, 2020, yesterday, was 81,575 ballots returned, or 30.6%. Ballots must be received at any Oregon official Dropbox site location by 8 p.m. As Commissioner Sorensen said, it's too late to put it in the mail, so don't put your ballot in the mail; it won't count. But you can drop it off at one of our Dropbox locations up until 8 p.m. They close at 8 p.m., so get there before 8 o'clock tonight. And election results will be posted at 8 p.m. tonight, followed by updated releases at approximately 10:30 p.m. and then when our staff leaves for the night, which is rather late. The election will be certified no later than June 8th, 2020. So hopefully we all have our election stickers, and we look forward to the results from the May election. The other item
Did you say today's election day? Today's election day?
Today is, yes, Commissioner. You should know that, Commissioner. The other update is on grants. So the board had asked me to keep you updated on grants, and so I'll just share this update that Mr. Kyler has prepared. We've received an additional $212,000 for public health. And I think that's it. I thought there was more to share there. But that's all I have. So $212,000 for public health. And I can forward that document to the board so that you see the updated information about all the grants that we have received. So I don't have anything else, Chair, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions for Steve? Okay, I don't see any. I think what we'll do is end with any commissioners' announcements. That's item 12B, so that in the afternoon, we'll have our climate change projection item, and then end the day with future board assignment requests. So are there any commissioner announcements? Okay. I don't see any for today. Thank you, everybody, for us being on time for the morning meeting. I really appreciate that. And we'll see everybody at 1:30. We are in recess.